Welcome back to Detroit Next. I'm Khary Frazier with Detroit is Different with
Malachi Barrett, BridgeDetroit reporter.
All right, and you all know that this is a show about the election and local election, which just completed. We're going to give some definite updates about so much that happened in this historic election. Mary Sheffield is elected the first woman mayor of the city of Detroit in a landslide victory. You were there for the festivities and witnessing it all. As Bryce even said, no one expected it to get called so early. What was the energy and feeling down there during the campaign at that rally?
Yeah, I mean, she had a historic win. Landslide is one way to describe it. We could probably come up with a bunch of different terms. I mean, it was a real walloping she delivered to Solomon Kinloch. She won with 77% of the vote. She had 88,000, give or take, votes total. That's a higher margin of victory and more raw votes than Mike Duggan had ever received across his 3 campaigns. She's the first woman of mayor of Detroit. We've had 75 mayors. This is now the first woman. She's also the first one to go from city council president to the mayor's office. I think there were 3 people that were council members before becoming mayor. She's the first one to be the council president, so that's also notable. And looking at her vote share across the city, it's pretty crazy. I mean, she won all but 3 precincts. She tied, I think, 2 others with Kinloch. The ones that Kinloch won were not really like full neighborhoods. They were kind of like these strange precincts that were like slices along the highway. So she had a really commanding victory. Looking at what happened from the primary, basically the number of people that didn't vote for her was similar to the number of votes that she gained in the general election, which suggests to me that a lot of people that didn't vote for Mary, maybe they voted for Todd Perkins or Santiel Jenkins or Fred Durhall or, any number of other folks that were in that race. A lot of them ended up coming around to Sheffield's message. She was able to win over a lot of those undecided voters. I was talking to her campaign manager today, Chris Scott, a little bit about their strategy and how they put all this together. And he was talking about the power that they had, the data, first of all, on voters, who's a typical voter, who's not, what are their interests. They were able to identify a group of people that, aren't really represented in traditional polling, who aren't really counted on as like the typical electorate. And they were able to target those people with the vast amount of financial resources that her campaign raised. She had a little shy of $3 million. She had like $2.7 million that she raised, spent more than $2 million. We've got one more campaign finance report that'll come out that'll tell us a little bit more about that. But just totally overwhelmed Kinloch in terms of resources. I mean, he ended their last campaign filing came out on the 19th of October, so like 2 weeks before the election. He was basically out of money. He had like $10,000 left in the bank. So while he had struggled, I think he raised about $600,000, $700,000 total, struggled to really match her campaign's, ability to go out and reach people. I think that was a big part of her success. But also she just had a message that more people seemed to resonate. When I was out at the polls talking to folks, they felt that her experience on the council really mattered. They thought it was really important that she's been leading the city council and been involved in a lot of the, the success of the city. She also had a pretty sober look at what's wrong with Detroit. I mean, she wasn't out there saying that everything's gravy, everything's fixed. Her message was really focused on continuing what's worked, but make sure it goes deeper, into the neighborhoods, bring new investment into the neighborhoods. And I just heard from a lot of people that really wanted to see that. Whereas Kinloch was more
his message was more so what's happening right now is not working and it's not working for you. So let's try something new because I'm from the outside. Whereas, as you said, Mary's message was definitely a lot of improvement can happen, but I've been on and in the political theater of what is going right. And as mayor, I'll be able to expand. So it really was saying that, okay, I understand legislative and a lot of the groups and advocates, activists she's worked with, organizations really did start clamoring more and more to her throughout the campaign. What was happening in the primary, she had a lot of support, but definitely after the primary, it seemed like so much more support just overwhelmingly came her way with the endorsement from Fred Durhall and Santiel Jenkins, the endorsement from Mayor Duggan, and so many others. It was really so many people saying that this will be our next mayor. And I believe that the people that supported her were more and more vocal as time went on and carried on and got more people to get out and support her.
Yeah, I mean, her coalition included the C-suite class, the business class, the executives in the city, but also had a lot of community and activists as well. And I think we saw that today, as we're recording this, she announced the leaders of her transition team that's going to come up with a 100-day action plan when she takes office in January. There's 18 committees that they put together to look at really specific issues that she raised throughout the campaign, like public safety and neighborhood investment, small business growth, things like that. And it's staffed by people like, Arn Tellem over at the Pistons, all the way, and Gary Torgo at Huntington Bank, all the way down to like Zeke Williams, who does community violence intervention work in the city, Donna Givens Davidson, who's at the East Side Community Network doing housing work. So it's a real broad, swath of the community that really got behind her. And we saw that, in her donations as well as the campaign went along. A lot of these institutional voices felt a lot more comfortable, coming behind her.
Very much so. I believe that it is a victory that so much of the community, but especially when we think of Black women throughout the city of Detroit and the political base that is, that definitely looked at last November's election and were completely upset of what happened in the presidential race, saying that we can't stand for another loss like that to happen. So some of that same, I guess, energy activated in many other ways. And even with the faith-based community, I mean, she had the support of the Council of Baptist Pastors, her also being an ordained pastor herself, but more so people just really identifying on all levels, saying that this is a moment in time for Detroit history. I think that this is going to only really set a hold of like what we grab onto when we look at that relationship with council too. And her coming from council is going to be a different perspective, I expect, because so much of like that council versus the mayor definitely has been in light when we think of council versus mayor at times, but I expect more of that relationship to be a lot more fluid and a lot more connected too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of eyes on Detroit now as a result of her win. She got a phone call from former Vice President Kamala Harris the day after the election, congratulating her and talking about women in power. What should she expect? They talked about the Office of Gun Violence that Sheffield wants to create. There was a similar task force created at the White House under the Biden administration. There were a lot of Democratic officials that were at her watch party. The chair of the Democratic Party, Khary Frazier, was there. Everyone running for office basically in 2026 was down there as well on the Democratic side. Mallory McMorrow, Haley Stevens running for Senate, Garland Gilchrist, who's going to be running for governor next year, was down there as well. So, Mary is now the second most powerful woman in Michigan behind Big Gretch. She is coming into her own now as a leader on the state and the national stage. She's one of a handful of Black women mayors, in the country's history, frankly, and also serving right now. So, she's kind of immediately going to be put into this kind of interesting situation with the elections next year. Mike Duggan, endorsed her. He's running for governor as an independent. What is she going to end up doing there? How is she going to work with Lansing to get her agenda done? But to your point, a lot of what she wants to do, may not be possible without support from the city council. That was a big piece of the Duggan success story. He talks about having a good relationship with city council members. On the plus side, she's going to come into office with a lot of those relationships already built because all incumbents who ran for re-election won. We have a few new faces to the council as well. But, I think a lot of them like and respect and have worked well with Mary before.
Because, I mean, she was the council president. So a lot of, I guess, when it comes to gathering people, and many of the council members were very effective at it. But I think in reaching community and gathering people and uplifting things like, when we think of, right to counsel, we think of a lot of the work done with the reparations task force. We think of a lot of the work done even for what's been happening with community violence intervention. These are all things that Mary's influence in that office was very engaged with.
Yeah, totally.
And we're only looking at 2 new seats, which kind of goes to the discussion about council. And we're looking at Denzel McCampbell in District 7 and also Renata Miller in District 5, right here, my district. And both council members are bringing in new energy. When we think of District 7 and how close that race was, you even brought that up. It was surprising to many people, but Denzel McCampbell, coming from that lens of activists, working in environmental rights, also working with people that are really strong when it comes to looking at, I don't like the way they frame like these socialist agendas, but more so just empowering people with the opportunity of being present for people if we're going to be in government. And that's really what he stood on. So him being in that District 7, I think will it's going to strengthen more of the coalition that we already exist. I think that he and Gabriella will work together a whole lot on things. And then even moving forward with Rashida, like when we really think Gabriella, Rashida, and also Stephanie Chang all kind of worked in unison. And now Denzel steps into this political space too on another local level. I'd expect a lot of advocacy and activism and people in many movements like the liberal space, the environmental justice space, and also from like more of a socialist lens, with being a Democrat, will all be applauding that victory. What was your take with Denzel? I don't know if you've talked to him since then. I sent him a text, but I was like, let me give him some time to chill for a second. But what was I don't know what you've been hearing.
Yeah, we interviewed him a couple times before the election about his approach to politics and his place within the Democratic Socialists of America and being supported by the Working Families Party, because this group in Michigan, Working Families Party, is pretty new. They were stood up last year. This was really their first test in Michigan, but prominently backed Zohran Mamdani for New York and New York mayor, and has been involved in other races across the country. Denzel is a Democratic Socialist. He also is a DSA member alongside Gabri Santiago Romero. Working Family Party endorsed both of them, as well as Letitia Johnson in District 4, who didn't have a challenger.
Ran unopposed.
Yeah, she ran unopposed. Nobody wanted to take her on. So, what are the issues that maybe those three members as a voting bloc will focus on is definitely something to look for. It's interesting that he was able to beat Karen Whitsitt, who's a state lawmaker who's kind of run into some controversy in recent years and breaking with Democrats and working with Republicans in some areas and playing a pretty pivotal role in walking away from the table during the lame duck session last year, which kind of contributed to a lot of the Democratic agenda falling apart at the end of that turn. And she's faced a lot of criticism for not being, as present in the legislature. I think a lot of that followed her in this city council race as well, where, Denzel was just, again, more out in the community, attending community forums and talking to people about what he wanted to do. And that translated on election day.
I was going to say, really, that moment, that lame duck session of what happened in the state of Michigan House, it's reverberated throughout this year politically on so many levels. But I actually think it's going to play more of a role when we look at the election next year, which we'll be talking more about that with another Detroit Next soon. But it still stands tall. And people are in such memory of saying to themselves, like, when's the last time that Michigan had a Democratic House, Democratic Senate to move something forward, and what would that look like? It actually, one of the mayoral candidates that dropped out first, Joe Tate, the Speaker of the House at the time, was looking for mayoral intentions, but I think that even had him say, okay, let me step back.
He dropped out pretty quick,
Yeah, because of what happened there. So Karen's definitely, I would say, going to definitely be in political discussions, but what that does moving forward. And District 7, as I uplifted when we were on the live stream, it's one of the districts that has a lot of industry that does exist there. So we're looking at kind of like that border of Dearborn. So if you're near that Dearborn border on the west side, it's a lot of industry over there. It's a lot of trucking traffic. A lot of people do speak to a lot of the pollution that does exist. When we think of District 6 and 7 combined, a lot of the environmental activists keep an eye on both those districts. Not saying that they're not caring about the rest of Detroit, but those are two places where it's heavy. And knowing that Denzel kind of comes from that lens, I would expect a lot of actions, legislation to be written up about what's happening with pollutants and working with a lot of the industry that is there. And when we think of it, District 7, though it's shaped different because all the districts changed, but that was Fred Durrall's seat. And Fred was really applauding bringing a lot more of the jobs and industry back to the space. And Denzel, when I interviewed him, was saying that we want to make sure that definitely it is employment opportunities, but we also have to recognize that industry must be engaged in balance with how they engage with our environment and connect. So I wanted to highlight that in Miller in District 5. That is the district where Mary Sheffield is now moving into mayor, so I think it's going to be more attention on that, as what Bryce was saying. But really, it's a lot of attention to District 5 anyway, because it's downtown, it's midtown, it's west side. Like over here, if people want to know where we record in Hope Village, but Linwood, Davison, kind of Dexter area, when we think of where Focus Hope is, and all the way to Indian Village. And Indian Village is where Miller did sit in leading that association and neighborhood, and had some union support. But it was really a lot of grit and grassroots to get her there, because a lot of media support was leaning towards who she ran against. So moving forward, I am going to definitely be keeping an eye on what happens in District 5, because I can imagine just balancing out, keeping everything in check for this district, because I really look at District 5 like it's a piece of the whole city of Detroit.
Yeah.
What have you been hearing or connecting to in reference to that D5 race?
Yeah, I always look at D5 as like, it has this like slice, like you're saying, of like pretty typical like residential neighborhoods, some of which have become like very popular for new people to move in, some of which have not and are just, have kind of remained. Some of which are depopulated, some of which are, adding more residents. It's got the downtown as well, and these like pretty prominent like development sites along the riverfront. So it's always kind of like a good lens to like see the different tensions in the city, especially when it comes to like development. I think that's one of the first kind of big battles we might see for the council next year. I don't think they're going to get it done this year, so it'll probably carry over to the next term, but there's a big zoning change that affects R2 districts and basically intends to add more density into residential areas. And I know folks in Indian Village and some surrounding neighborhoods over there are, at least there's some folks who are being louder. I can't speak to like what is the overall community thing, but there's been a lot of criticism about that. They want to kind of maintain, the character of the neighborhood as it is. Renata has been kind of an anti density voice I've been hearing in recent weeks. So I haven't had a chance really to talk to her about what her vision on that is, but I think that could be one of the first kind of division points we see among the council.
Well, it was a spirited community discussion, and I think you attended that. But at the Butzel, it's two Butzel recreational facilities. You got the one on the west side and the one on the east side. But the one on the east side is looking at for some development to come in there, and that's definitely where I think a lot of residents feel as though they're open to new neighbors, but also at what consideration for the people that have been here. So that's really the biggest discussion. It's nothing against who wants to come, but what are the considerations given to people that are coming? And at times it seems like as a legacy Detroiter, especially legacy Black Detroiters, we're feeling like a lot of considerations are given to attract new people, but nothing is being given to the people that have been here, that have stayed here, that have connected here, that want to be here. And I think that Eastside Butzel Recreation Center is a classic example when you think a lot of the people that have moved over to that community are not really engaging with the space, but the people that have lived there, especially like the seniors, that's one of the few places they can gather and, do the different events that they have. And then just more so just connect to like some of the exercise. But depending upon how you enter a community, it can look like, okay, we don't even use this place. But then again, how are we using the space? Who is it utilizing, or who is it really being aimed to and connected to? It's going to be a lot of discussions about that. And in that same district, we're looking at the Uniroyal site that now is the Detroit Sparks WNBA team reigniting, and that's going to be another discussion. You've been at some of these discussions definitely all the time when it comes to like the abatements and considerations given for what development does look at, and some of those developments you've definitely been in for the Detroit Football Club or the soccer stadium that's coming. Do you think that that's going to feel a little bit different in this transition? Because Mary she was that lone vote that stood against District Detroit. When we look at, that was one of the last, I think, large media attention.
That was probably the most controversial tax break that's come across in recent years. There's been a couple other big projects like that, but she voted against that. And here we are a couple years later, and they still haven't really built any of the stuff that they said they would. So I think that's going to be pretty top of mind as Gilbert and the Rensen partners kind of get ready to ask for more public money. The Downtown Development Authority this week said they're going to grant $75 million to that project to reimburse them for some of the public amenity aspects of what they want to do with the Rensen, making it this kind of public plaza hangout area similar to what you see in Chicago and other other big cities like waterfront spaces. So there's going to be at this point, it looks like the Pistons project, or I shouldn't call it the Pistons project, really. The Pistons are involved in bringing the WNBA team to Detroit. Its headquarters would be at this Uniroyal site along the riverfront. that's going to require some tax breaks to get done. For sure, they're going to ask the city for some money. They're probably going to avoid the community benefits process, it looks like. So that should be probably controversial for folks because it's always a way to get additional investments in the community from big projects. To kind of go back to D7, D6, another thing that really united Santiago Romero and Denzel McCampbell was that they were explicitly like anti-corporate candidates. They said they weren't going to accept any corporate PAC money. Santiago Romero actually rejected a donation from one of Dan Gilbert's PACs to kind of uphold that pledge. And there's a couple other members on the council too that are very like skeptical and want to hold developers accountable, and the large corporations in the city that make a lot of decisions about what happens to these big prominent sites. So where does Renata Miller fall into that? I'm not really sure. It'll be interesting to kind of see what impact her vote has among the 9-member body.
I would say it's really kind of from the interview and kind of connecting with some of the people on our team, a lot's really going to rely on how community is going to show up and be present. Even when she came to the Detroit is Different Forum, just staying the whole time, really interacting with people. She was traveling to my neighborhood a lot more than I would expect most people to even travel over this way, and getting an opportunity to talk to a lot of the residents. Being that she comes from that lens of being a person in a neighborhood group, she's very open to saying like, okay, I really want to see the people that live there, what's their perspective of things. And that's also one of the toughest things when we even think about the community benefits agreements and how they built the councils for that. Hence the, Community Advisory Council, very interested in what those results will be, which will be showing probably by the time this airs. So you can get that at BridgeDetroit and other places.
That information wasn't available on election night for write-in candidates. You can write in any name, but for it to count, the candidate has to be certified by the clerk. And so on election day, all those numbers for write-in candidates were just included in one segment altogether. We'll find out when Wayne County certifies the votes, who actually won those Board of Police Commissioners races, those Community Advisory Council races. And that information should be available by the time this podcast comes out.
But that's going to be a very key one, because depending upon how a lot of these community benefits agreements go and how the people that make up the board of what those bodies are doing, it's going to play out in people's minds. When I interviewed, he was running in District 5 at one point, but George Adams, and he was speaking about some of the Herman Kiefer project that has been long stalled and not moved forward, and then also into what the Henry Ford project has been. And we're seeing the development right there at Henry Ford, but just knowing that I'm a Northwestern graduate, I'm still connected to so many people in that neighborhood, and it's a lot of residents that feel as though they have not been a part of the discussions of all of the changes that Henry Ford has brought over to that community. And it's from two lenses, because you go to an event with the Pistons or Michigan State or anything with Henry Ford, they're saying that the community loves this. And then you talk to the residents and they're like, I had no idea that this is changing. It's changed streets. It's reconfigured the whole neighborhood over there, and it's not even necessarily completely executed. Also, when the changes happen with the Motown Museum, these are the things that I think are really the guts of where community voice and who's offering the ear to community voice will really play out big. And I think that this council is going to be a lot different too, because I'd imagine that Mary Sheffield's executive branch is not going to be as so driven, or as like Duggan really came in from the perspective of, I want to eliminate blight. We want to get new things built here. So like that reaching out to development and getting new things to come was really focused. I really think that this is an opportunity where community voice can really be uplifted through legislator and the executive branch.
Yeah, I mean, she's going to be a pretty pro-business mayor too, I would imagine. I've talked to her before about what do we do about poverty in the city? It's gotten worse. The childhood poverty rate has increased. These are bad signs, for the overall quality of life in the city, while we do, celebrate things that have gotten better. And she said part of the strategy around eliminating poverty is having good jobs for people, to work in. And that includes bringing new businesses in and having better business development, supporting the legacy businesses that have been here for a long time. She's done a lot of work on council to supply them with grants and financial assistance, technical assistance from the city. It also is going to probably mean some big splashier developments that could cause, some tension among residents. There's some big decisions to be had with the land bank next year.
Yes.
That's one thing her transition team is going to be looking at pretty closely. On the campaign trail, Sheffield said that she wants to take a lot of the responsibilities of the land bank and wrap them back under city oversight. So having that mostly operate out of the housing department instead of this kind of quasi public-private entity. Which released its 5-year plan. I was reading an outlier actually the other day that a lot of that plan is kind of a pitch for why the land bank is still necessary. So that's going to be a big, point of conversation for the city council and the next mayor. How does that land bank operate? Because I think that is like really the source of a lot of issues around what's happening in neighborhoods and who gets a say. People complain about the lack of transparency around what land is available for people to purchase. What is the city's plans for vacant land? How do people in the neighborhood get to access that, take ownership of it and, see their own neighborhood vision, implemented.
And along with that, though, we really got to frame this from multiple lenses when you talk about the land bank and that access and where community stands, because really what's come about is there are some land in the land bank seems to be off limits to so many residents, but definitely accessible to certain people. And that's been one of the biggest gripes with especially when we think of the urban agricultural movement and a lot of people in that space saying like, okay, I can't get access to this lot that's right across the street or right next to my house, but it's owned by some corporation. God knows where this corporation is. So that's going to be very key. I think more discussions about that. And even Mayor Duggan was like, okay, look, we almost can look at dissolving this, but I think that he left that as business for what will happen between council in the future and what will happen with the mayor in the future. But we even think of why the Land Bank Authority exists in the first place, which I stand on what my godmother, Joanne Watson, was saying, like the bankruptcy itself and everything that went on around that bankruptcy definitely was something where we look at the debts that the state of Michigan already still owes Detroit, recognized, but said we can never really pursue and go after. I wonder, will any of the legislator or even the executive branch look at pursuing that? Also, every time you talk about Detroit politics and legacy Black Detroiters, we're also uplifting the discussion of what happened to the tax payments that were owed. Now, Mary Sheffield has been one from a legislative lens that's looked at there are ways to make people whole and make this right for people. So I wouldn't be surprised if more actions move forward in that, because it's still like a bad taste in certain Detroiters' mouths about what's been happening and how it's happened and who these opportunities that have been provided in this new Detroit been given to.
Yeah, overassessment remains a big issue. People come down to city council every week and talk about that. There was a big push a few weeks ago after the election from folks who wanted tax reform to be one of the first things that Mayor Sheffield takes up, something that she's talked about quite a bit. So we're going to have to see what that exactly looks like. Part of the idea is to create a amusement tax on downtown entertainment. When you go to a sporting event or a concert, she's going to need the legislature's approval to do that. Is that one of the first big asks she has of Lansing? We're going to have to see what comes out of this 100-day plan in terms of like what gets first priority, what maybe happens a little bit later on. Land bank's interesting. She was on the city council when they decided to cut the subsidy for the land bank moving forward. And to your point about what land is available, that's one of the things that they're trying to improve when it comes to transparency. They're going to roll out some new dashboards at the land bank for people to see, okay, what's going on with this side lot on my street? Why can I not buy it? People probably don't realize that there's something called a land review process. Long story short, city departments can ask the land bank to put a hold on property, to basically say, don't sell this, either one parcel or like a collection of parcels, because we have some kind of plan for it. Either we already have a developer that's interested in the site, or we're going to package this to developers and say, boy, this would be really great for X kind of business, Y kind of business. And it's not always clear to people where those reviews are, when they expire, what they're being set aside for. Sometimes they're set aside for future planning efforts to kind of take shape so the city can have, a better sense of what area, what change should happen in a neighborhood. But that's just one of the ways that people, when they go to look up a parcel in their area and it's not available for sale and they're kind of like, why? Well, this hopefully should give people some better. I don't think that's going to solve the overall problem that people have with the land bank. So it'll be interesting to see if they can navigate some of these concerns and make some changes. or if the city will say, thank you for your service, land bank. We're going to take it from here.
I think that I see it dissolving. That's just a gut feel from where I'm coming from. But also with that dissolving, another point, just kind of picking up to so much of what you were saying with Mary was when Mary Sheffield came in here before that last interview, she also spoke to a lot of what's happened with Creo and some of these agreements and the jobs that will be produced as far as like definitely having a changing of how you can get more money to Detroiters and definitely make sure that so many young people in Detroit are not living and enduring the poverty that does exist throughout Detroit currently. So I do expect action to be done on that. That is something even the Duggan administration spoke to, that like this needs to change and actively change. So that Creo department takes assessment of a lot of these community benefits agreements, especially when it comes to the jobs and them and all of the community benefits agreements being fulfilled, and where do a lot of these developments stand? Because right now, when it comes to employment, these developments are in horrible shapes when it comes to employing Detroiters. I do see that changing, that she spoke directly to, and I see this council moving forward on making sure that that changes too. So it'll be like that balance of if that moves forward, what ways and like what will be that relationship between this legislator and this executive office? And then because this is a race for the state coming up next year, and we also have the possibility of Mayor Duggan becoming the governor of Michigan, I wonder would that even play a role more so in ensuring that if these developments do come to Detroit, Detroiters are going to be the first hired to actually be in our own communities and working.
Yeah. I mean, she talked today as well about the abatement cliff, which came up, I think, a couple times when we were interviewing folks for this podcast. Councilmember Durhal brought it up, basically where once tax abatements expire, the taxes jump way up on those properties. And there's concern basically that developers are going to be able to keep housing affordable, with discounted rates, that they're going to be able to maintain like the financial stability of these projects without those tax breaks. And so she talked about the importance of having abatements, conceptually as a way to make sure that projects are financially feasible. Given our high tax rates, it's just really hard to see developments, especially on like larger scale, happen without some kind of public investment. That seems to be kind of the mainstream view that we hear from public officials when we talk to them about that. But, one thing's pretty clear, like getting 77% of the vote, members of her transition team said that this gives them a clear mandate from the voters that they support the agenda, that they want to see her take some bold action. And so they feel really confident that they have the people's backing as they start to embark on this work. And we'll be, watching the transition pretty closely over the next couple of months before she gets into office in January. There should be some releases of some of her specific policy proposals on some of these things. Were there any real surprises for you on election day?
Definitely. I saw Mary winning, but similar to Bryce, I didn't think that it would get called that early. I mean, it was like the polls closed and
they called it at 9:15. So that's like an hour and 15 minutes after polls closed. They already had enough.
Yeah. So like the polls closed, you got up, got something to eat, came back to the TV, she's announced the winner. And almost like, as soon as Janice Winfrey that ran out of polls was announced, Mary Sheffield was announced. So that was surprising to me. The other thing that I was like, okay, this is something that I like to see is more so what's happening around some of the discussions for police commission. So like the coalition that is already kind of come together around the police commission. I know we'll talk probably more about that moving forward and everything, but it's more attention paid there.
Former Chief James White is on her public safety committee for the transition team. Current Chief Todd Bettison was at the watch party as well. So that might give you a signal of something. She's talked about wanting to keep Bettison, which is rare because she hasn't really said she has like a strong intention to like retain the Duggan administration officials in place. She said that actually they've gotten about 800 job applications from people around the city for cabinet positions and department positions in her administration. So they're giving everybody a look. They want to look at people from outside the country, or I'm sorry, outside the city, around the country, people that are kind of superstars maybe who grew up here and left and bring them back to the city. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch too.
I definitely think that I would think that the last time Detroit really had a time like this was when Mayor Kilpatrick was elected mayor for the first time, as far as like the energy around young person getting into that office and so much that could come to life from this. There'd be a lot of attention paid. So I think that right now, really, these first 2 years, a lot can really, great foundation can be laid and relationships can be built with community that can last for forever.
We want to hear from people about what you're looking forward to in the next year. What are your expectations for the new mayor and the city council? Definitely reach out to us on, BridgeDetroit.com is always the best way to find us. I don't know if you guys knew that, but but send us an email, shoot us a note on social media. We want to get some feedback from people as we kind of craft this coverage moving forward. I think we will probably have one more episode of Detroit Next to look at some things that are to come in the next year. But it was cool on election day. I was out at the polls and I was hearing from people that actually listened to our interviews with the candidates and it helped them make their choice. So it's good to hear.
Yeah, and that was another thing. It was more people voted than I thought. It still was not like 50%, but more than we thought.
Turnout
that was good.
Yeah, turnout bounced back. It was on a decline. It was 19% in 2021. And in this race, it was 22%. So, not as high as folks would like, but definitely suggested that more people were getting involved in this. The big thing is in presidential years, it's closer to like 50%. So there's a big drop off from like those national elections to the local ones. But again, she had a higher vote share. Turnout was higher than the previous election. And just numbers wise, like she really built a really strong victory on election day.
Most definitely. So yeah, thank you all so much for checking this out. You all see, we could talk this like all day, but more so, we definitely want to hear from you all and love the support of Detroit Next, this project between Detroit is Different and Bridge Detroit. Always make sure you give, and also definitely
subscribe,
Malachi,
like, comment. Support Detroit is Different. Support us. Big year ahead for Detroit. We're in a historic moment, an inflection point, as a lot of folks have framed it. And we're going to be here in the front row seat, making sure, I guess, first of all, that, the folks that were elected, we're going to be holding them accountable and making sure that they're doing what they said they would do.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Peace.
Detroit Next is a community-led project from Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different, which means that we can't do this work without you. We need your support. If you have a question or a comment and want to participate in this process throughout the year, give us a call. We have a phone line set up at 313-284-6407. Leave us a message and we'll play it on the podcast. If you like what we're doing, head to bridgedetroit.com and subscribe to our newsletters. All of that content, again, is free, no paywalls for anybody. We're trying to make this as accessible as possible. Head to our YouTube channel to get full episodes and interviews along with extra content throughout the year. You can also find the audio version of this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and DetroitNext.podbean.com. We're going to be doing this all year long, so stay with us. Follow Bridge Detroit and Detroit is Different on your favorite social media platforms and take this ride with us. Thanks.